G'day folks, ZiggyD here. On my recent trip to the Grinding Gear Games studios to host the Q&A, I had a few hours to try some hands-on with the new Keepers of the Flame expansion. Thanks to ZiggyD for flying me out there. So let's roll up a witch and mess with the newly buffed wands as we explore Breach 2, along with the new grafts and crafts that it brings. And now won't you join me for a wander on the Breach?
Creatures from another world are invading Rayclast.
Surprise, surprise, once again the Mudflats is experiencing some new drama. We simply must attach a sentient arm from another dimension to our back if we want to continue.
Take this graft. It will meld with your essence and alter you, allowing you to wield our flame against the invading Hiveborn.
So she ends up acting surprised that we survived after we do so. Classic.
Good. You survived the melding.
Kinda makes you wonder how many others didn't before us. But, you know, we've been shoving questionable things in ourselves in the quest for loot for over a decade now, so we're pretty much experts at it at this point. This first graft is just really a basic one as a placeholder to let you interact with the new version of breaches. Areas of stabilized breach incursion where the breachlings are building fortifications. Thankfully, those fortifications are meaningless to us because the flames just automatically burn them away without even slowing us down. And this lets us clear a path to the center where we can call Ilith to destroy the breach. In classic PoE fashion, it's not unusual to get wrecked by the league mechanic in the Mudflats. Oh yeah, that's a new league right there. But the good news is you don't just seem to instantly fail the mechanic here. I was able to run back and keep fighting when this sort of thing happened.
You did it! You exposed the center! I can destroy this rift. I just need time. Defend me while I focus my will.
These fortified breaches give you a decision. How much wall do you burn away? Burning more means more attackers and more angles of attack to watch out for as well. But more kills does give you more graft blood and more loot, so there's your risk reward element. And to help on top of that, there are various power-ups spread around the area that you can kind of unlock by burning walls around them, freezing enemies, shielding Ilith, and a few variations of ones that kill monsters. These can be pretty impactful, and in the harder breaches, you can save these for those last couple waves when the things get a bit spicy. After surviving this first tutorial breach, Ilith summons us to the Keeper's Temple to bring the horned skull that we found.
We can give this piece of the enemy to the Genesis tree to cultivate her growth.
You'll occasionally discover breach monster body parts like this, and they're one of two ways to unlock new parts of the Genesis tree and to give more passives to spend in it. The other way to progress is simply just to spend as much graft blood as you can, which you gather from each breach that you close based on the kills that you get. The Genesis tree lets you grow gear, currency, uniques, and new grafts, those creepy back arms. Each subtree within it allows you to customize how each of these things work when you grow them, which I'll show more of that off later. But for now, we can simply put the growing Wombgift in the Genesis tree to grow our first real graft. These have base types themed around one of the Breach Lords, a graft skill that they grant, and some random stats that affect either you or that graft skill. So I first get a Tulgraft here, which means that it's cold themed, and it's got some chance to freeze and projectile speed bonuses for me too. But the real boon here is that skill that it has. Falling Crystals. This arm is its own creature that lives on our back, and this one throws ice at any frozen or chilled enemies around us. That's quite creepy and cool. And I have to say, many of the grafts I tried were powerful and impactful while leveling too. They were actually pretty interesting to incorporate into my gameplay too. Like for this simple first one, this Tulgraft needs enemies to be chilled, so I made sure to pick up Frostblink and use it to maintain chill on enemies so that it would auto-attack them with its icicles for me. Later on, getting some cold damage from Herald of Ice lets me fully automate a Tulgraft like this too. So the skills have a set level, and there's a bunch of them to mess with, so you can and should be swapping them out pretty regularly as you go. And later on, you can use the Genesis tree to influence which grafts you tend to get once you figure out good matches for your build. So the graft skills are pre-scaled, and they don't scale with your stats. The arm is its own little independent thing. It's not you, which just makes it creepier. That's good because it means that attack grafts can still be used on your spellcaster builds and vice versa. But that's not really to say that you can't synergize with them. There'll definitely be some that will be better for certain builds. For example, a build that lowers enemy cold resistance would be better with a Tulgraft like this one that's doing cold damage. So as you may have noticed in the background, in addition to those fortified stabilized breaches that we encountered earlier, there are also these quote-unquote normal breaches. These are the unstabilized breaches that just work like old school breach, somewhat. Step into the flame and it opens briefly for you to fight breach monsters. The more you kill, the more it stabilizes and the longer it stays open. Eventually the idea is to stabilize it, it'll stay open until you fight like a boss or a big wave of enemies or something like that. But early on you aren't expected to stabilize these until somewhere about maybe halfway through the campaign, so don't stress about it too much early on. I think you'll just quickly pop them and get some kills for some easy graft blood, and if it's a particularly juicy one, you can try and kill a bit more for better loot and the potential Wombgift drops. So a quick note about these. In the footage, you'll see that I have to return to the original unstable breach hand location to loot, and that's not really ideal, didn't feel very good. So I'm happy to say that I was talking to ZiggyD about this, that it was going to be a bit of a quality of life issue for players that would definitely get mentioned. And while making this video, they just confirmed that that's changing to drop on the player instead when the breach finishes, similar to how Delirium works. You love to see it, that preemptive quality of life buff. Good stuff. So it's 50-50 as to whether you get one of these quick unstable breaches or one of the more fortified stabilized ones in each zone. And very early on, the majority of your loot and progression in your Genesis tree does come from the fortified ones. The regular breaches picked up a lot in Act 3 and onwards, but the main thing is that the unstable breaches are just really quick to do. You just step on them, kill some monsters, and run and scoop up a little bit of free graft blood and maybe some loot if it was a juicier one. Now when you first start Gearcrafting the Genesis tree at the beginning of Act 1, it's about what you'd expect with crafting random rare gear. You will get some good items that most of the time aren't the item type that you need, so you can't use them. But that's where the tree nodes come into play as you progress, and pretty soon after, you'll start getting the ability to specify exactly what you want. The main thing is, early on, you really just want to focus on getting new grafts to experiment with, and then you can supplement your currency and gear a little bit where you can, just to spend that extra graft blood. And remember that spending the graft blood is the main way that you unlock new passives, so keep spending it. Another cool quality of life pre-patch note, in the video you'll see that my graft blood is lost when I swap grafts. They've actually already patched this so that it's kept, and you can upgrade and experiment with new grafts as much as you want without losing anything. Good stuff. So it's been a while since I have played ones in PoE1, and I expected it to be a little bit rough prior to getting the new skills, but Kinetic Bolt and Prismatic Burst is pretty solid, and the combination of being a bit over-leveled from breaches with the extra gear that I was getting meant that it felt pretty smooth. And not to mention the Graftskills as well. The Frostbink plus Icicle Toss thing was enough to clear most packs on its own. After Brutus, the next graft I got was another Tulgraft, but this time with the Dance in the Wind skill. This is a manual cast skill, differently to the other one which was auto-attacked, and it lets you summon a tornado. It has this whole component of when you crit, it fires projectiles as well. Though at my level I didn't really get a chance to test this, I wasn't really critting enough at this point for you to see that in action. But it didn't even matter one bit, as the tornado itself was just amazing. Tons of damage and a pretty nice duration too. It stuck around and hunted down enemies and cleared the breaches for me. Definite potential there. It's almost a shame then, but I actually found another great graft to try, so I didn't actually get to play with the tornado for too long, because I picked up a Flamecaller Xophgraft. This creates 3 pillars of fire in a line that deals a hefty amount of damage and applies covered in ash to enemies, which increases fire damage taken. This graft was consistently great when I had it a few different times. Good damage, it fills out that coverage area in front of you quite nicely to fill up any gaps. It's a really nice single target boost on larger bosses too, it seems to be multi-hitting. And it just looks super satisfying as well. So once I got to Mervel's Cavern, I finally got a chance to try one of the new wand skills, Kinetic Rain, and I am in love. It calls down a set of very pretty arcing projectiles that auto-target enemies in a large area, and then it leaves behind these anomalies that detonate when enemies touch them. It's very satisfying and very strong. Now, obviously, from Breach, I'm like consistently over-leveled and over-geared, so it even looks better than it should, but it's definitely a very strong skill when I was messing around with it, so I should mention that it has actually been changed a bit from this footage already, unsurprisingly, I think. It'll have lower initial hit damage, with more of the damage being in the anomalies it leaves behind. So it might not be quite this powerful, but what you're going to see in this gameplay is a little bit disgusting, so fair enough. Anyway, I know what I'm league starting. It's such a satisfying skill.
Poor fishwife.
So onwards into Act 2, I noticed the fortified breaches started sometimes having 8 waves, so they seem to pick up. I still never lost a single one to Aelith dying either throughout my entire playthrough, which is good. It seems pretty well tuned in that regard. They can be dangerous for you as the player, and I died did die a couple of times when I got like a really spicy breach. Especially if I also happen to like clear a lot of spawners and get surrounded or caught by surprise by one of the faster ones. But that's the sort of thing that I want. I want to be like dying because I get overwhelmed, not because like Aelith dies while I'm blasting monsters. They really focus on you, the player, so even I think lower DPS builds, you should still have a pretty good time with this, I think. I think that shows ZiggyD is learning from previous leagues like Blight, where this was an issue, where like low DPS characters would just kind of like slowly watch the monsters crawl to and blow up the pump and not really be able to do much about it. So after obliterating Weaver with Kinetic Rain, I grabbed the Kinetic Instability and Sacred Wisp support. Sacred Wisp is unsurprisingly great. It's just more attacks after all. And Kinetic Instability is good for boosting clear, but it doesn't seem to have any usefulness against bosses. It basically summons orbs on kill that can detonate on any other enemies that are still alive in the area. So I foresee this support being used for things like breach farming and other dense, clear, focused content only. Throughout the rest of this run, I swap wand skills pretty often and mess with supports and things like that, just so I can see how wands are feeling overall, and not just the new skill. I didn't want to just be like, oh, the new skills, obviously. I'm, you know, a bit overpowered. I have to say that I was pretty happy with everything I tried as well. A nice help is those new kinetic ones that come up every so often, maybe like every 12-ish levels or something like that. There's certain breakpoints where these things rotate around. These new ones can only roll attack mods, and that's just a big help. Chucking a flat damage essence on them usually resulted in something quite usable, and gearing overall while leveling was quite smooth with the extra juice from Keepers of the Flame too. There were quite a few grafts I didn't try, for example things like the Grey Wind Howls, which removes ailments on you to boost your damage. That one, for example, seems like it could be absolutely cracked at endgame, when you can do things like apply ailments to yourself after all. But obviously just less useful while leveling and not really something I could test while leveling, so I didn't really bother giving those a go. There was some, for example, that gave buffs at low life, which, you know, aren't really that good while leveling if you're not playing some sort of forced low life build. But if you're like a Petrified Blood build or something, then that's great. So around Act 3, the Gearcrafting started getting much better from the Genesis tree. I was able to start biasing it and improving what dropped significantly, making sure that they had better links and nearly always had an intelligence requirement, for example, so that I could use them. My plan was to see if I could get an SSF 5 link using the Genesis tree system by Act 4-ish, so we'll return to check on that plan soon and see how it goes. Early Act 3 I got my first rare graft as well, an Icicle Tulgraft. These can have up to 4 modifiers, and the 2 prefixes will always have 1 power mod for you and 1 economic mod, so those are things like graft blood gained or capacity, or increased chance to find certain breach related drops. And then the 2 suffixes can be power mods for the graft itself. In this case, I got 1 modifier here that was 50% increased damage for the Falling Crystals skill, and that's a pretty big deal when you think about it, because that's just straight up 1.5 times damage, since they don't have any other sources of scaling. They don't work with your scaling, so that's just 50% more, right? That makes this one quite chunky. It's good to see that those modifiers are going to potentially be quite impactful if they're cooldown or just a ton of damage, for example. Partway through Act 3, I started getting these Ancient Wombgifts as well. These ones give you uniques. As well as I unlocked that section of the tree so that I could start using them. These ended up printing some pretty decent leveling uniques as I went, and I didn't have any of the additional nodes to actually make them better as well that you'll get later on. But what I got was great. The Yondar's class was pretty good get for wonder leveling especially. It's a nice attack speed and extra damage. I tested Power Siphon out for a bit, and it's solid. It's, you know, obviously not as good single target as some of the other skill options, which is not unusual for that skill, but it has that quality of life of the auto-targeting around you. And soon after that, I remembered the new Wall of Force skill, and I decided to test good old Kinetic Blast. So the oldies among us may remember when you could wallbang Kinetic Blast off Frost Wall for infinite single target damage back in the day. Well, they brought that mechanic back in a much more controlled and reasonable fashion. Wall of Force permits you to shoot it to trigger kinetic blast explosions on top of bosses, just like we did back in the day, but the wall is much more reasonable. You can only have one of them out, they have a longer cooldown, it can only take a certain number of shots before breaking. So it's much more balanced, but it's still a really powerful tool for bossing on Kinetic Blast to smooth out that single target if the boss is not near a wall, for example. A bit after this, I get another fun new graft skill too, the Battering Uulgraft's Return to Dust skill. This summons a bunch of breach hands to slam a boss for physical damage with improved stun. So the one that I got on my witch there was actually from a really old Wombgift that was quite underleveled for these zones, so the damage wasn't very relevant. but I did get a chance the next day to test a more appropriately leveled one on a warrior that I was running through. It's maybe not as OP as some of the other ones. It only targets rares and bosses, but it's kind of one of my favorites just for being hilarious. And when it does high roll and you're, intimidating a boss, for example, so they take increased damage from it, it can chunk pretty satisfyingly. Before I jump back to the Wanda, I also found an Eshgraft on this warrior that summons lightning boys to explode on enemies and lay shocked ground, which you can see against Val here. I'm sure that'll get some use. Anyway, back to the main story. So wanding on my made-up-on-the-fly build was only getting spicier as I progressed, and after popping Calm, I finally get a chance to test my 5-link theory now that I'm high enough level. And sure enough, the Genesis tree does what it says. It does not disappoint. It lets you strongly influence what gear it creates, and by investing in nodes for body armor and lucky sockets and links, I was able to start printing 5 links. Like, really, printing 5 links. So the provisioning tree for gear allows you to quickly influence the attribute requirements heavily and also specify slot type, for example making body armor a really good choice for pushing for linked gear. And then there's also this minor node and major node that give you extra rerolls on sockets and links for a total of 160 rerolls. And that is well over the expected number to get a 5 link on an item. So with my tree, I just quickly rushed for intelligence, body armor, and sockets. It's just simple and powerful with a ton of customization, this tree. You can do this, or you can focus on getting jewels, you can focus on specific weapon types or quivers with specific modifiers. There's a lot of potential here. Like late game, there's going to be some really interesting potential with the ability to improve modifier tiers significantly, restrict unwanted modifiers from rolling, as well as trimming the lowest tier modifier from an item to give good potential crafting bases too. So it's a solid self-found dream for sure, but I'm sure there'll be interesting trade applications too. But leveling, really nice. You can just get those 5 links cranking. I'm not going to show much else of the tree. There's a lot more here to discover, obviously. I just wanted to give you an idea of what ZiggyD is doing with this. I think it's probably one of the more clever reward/crafting systems that they've done. So not long after that, I got the chance to take Kinetic Blast and Kinetic Rain into Malachi, and the results go as you'd expect. Pretty well. I decided not to push much further than this on the character, as, again, I don't really want to show and spoil everything with these previews, just give you an insight into how the systems work, and some first impressions on the new content. Yeah, just to whet that appetite a little bit more before release. ZiggyD set out here to carefully take a beloved and simple league, Breach, with its kill monster and circle gameplay, and they tried to preserve that while expanding its appeal to more people with less clear speed challenge focused design, like for example the Fortified Breaches, right? Like obviously you don't want to get overwhelmed by them, but there's no sort of like, oh, I don't kill and move fast enough, so I'm not like pushing the Breach out as much. That gameplay still exists with the basic Breaches to an extent, but they've expanded this content out to more builds, I think. On first impressions, this seems to work really well too. I definitely quite liked the hives, the Fortified Breaches. But what really impressed me overall, I think, was the Graftskills actually being quite fun. Them being interesting and impactful in the campaign was just like such a good surprise. I don't think they'll be quite as meta-warping as the Mercenaries were, they were definitely pretty huge, but they are a fun design, and I hope they can scale well into endgame too, as I'm pretty excited by the potential to use 2 of them at once. I was also pretty impressed by the Genesis tree as a reward and crafting system. There's some real potential here. I touched on this in the Q&A livestream, but I think that the tree is a brilliant way to break something like crafting down that's just so naturally complicated and hard to understand kind of all the steps that go into it. This is just like such a good way of communicating a concept like that. But I definitely think if this proves successful, we could see it influencing future designs for other mechanics in the future. Something about like allocating these nodes, like allocating resources to kind of put a craft recipe together. I think there's some real potential there. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I hope you've enjoyed this wander about the breaches with me. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.